to sign in. Yes, there's still quite a few people jumping into the call at the moment, so we're going to give everybody a couple of minutes. And what I will say is that we are really wanting to encourage people to use the chat function today. So I would love it if everybody could, if they're comfortable, share in the chat who they are and where they're from, because I think that'll just give us a bit of a sense of who we're all talking to today at this webinar. And I'm going to wait for one more minute and then we will get started. I will openly say that I am not used to using Zoom, so I'm in foreign territory and normally a Microsoft Teams person. So I'm trying to make sure I've got all the information that I need in the right place on my screen. So apologies if I'm a bit slow today. Okay, so 3 minutes passed and we will get going with the mind that we'll have other people joining as we go. So welcome everybody to the Data for Children Collaborative's Resolutions webinar. It's called Resolutions because we'd originally planned it for January and then we had to move it out to February, but I think still the title is really relevant because this is a bit of a taking stock moment, take stock of where we've been and what we've done in the last 3 years and looking forward and thinking about what's next and how we want to operate and what we offer and the way that we do that. So I really think the resolutions title still stands even though we've got to February. So just to go quickly through the agenda today to remind you what you've all signed up for an hour and a half. And we're not going to rush through everything. We're going to take our time and have some really interesting conversations. But if we just go to the agenda slide, Ivona. Great, thank you. So we are going to have a bit of an introductory conversation which is led by Stefan Verhulst, who's our chair. He's normally over in New York and leads the GovLab over there, which is part of New York University, but he's actually in Egypt today because he does ping around the world. So he's joining us from Egypt, and along with those reflections are going to be with Lucinda Rivers from UNICEF, head of UNICEF Scotland, and Chris Speed, who's the director of the Edinburgh Futures Institute. So an introduction from Stefan, and then we're going to go into some case studies of some of the projects that we've been working on at the Data for Children Collaborative. And those projects are plentiful, and we've had to pick 3, but we had plenty of options of what we could go through. But we've got conversations with UNICEF on 2 projects around climate change and population and the academics that have led those projects, as well as conversation with The Promise, who are an organisation in Scotland looking at the system around children and care, and the organisation that's helping to develop a data map for them. And then we'll have a bit of a reflection at the end about what's coming up, what's next, and we're very excited about the future. So we want to kind of highlight some of the elements relating to that. So I am going to hand over to Stefan. Stefan, unless you would like me to do a very brief overview on the Data for Children Collaborative itself.
Sure, Alex, why don't you get us started, and then happy to position the effort within a broader context as well.
Okay, so Yvonne, if you want to pop down the slides, thank you. The Data for Children Collaborative is a specialist unit within the Edinburgh Futures Institute at the University of Edinburgh. And we have a mission to effectively use data and data science responsibly to improve children's lives. And we do that through collaboration. And we've existed for 3.5 years. And we've been working really closely with UNICEF and the Scottish Government to deliver these sort of portfolio of projects across a number of themes that we'll kind of go into today. But we've been building collaborative teams to deliver those projects, and those are made up of academics, the public sector and private sector who are speaking today. But ultimately, we've been working really hard to develop those methodologies that enable the right conditions and the right environment to solve complex challenges facing children. And for us, it's all about bringing in diverse perspectives and interesting combinations of disciplines and of knowledge to start to look at how we use data and data science responsibly to solve those problems. So, Stefan, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Alex. And thanks everyone for joining today. Really delighted to see so much interest in the Data for Children's Collaborative. And as Alex says, I've been chair of the steering board of the Data for Children's Collaborative since its inception. And I just want to basically make kind of 4 big reflections to get us started. And I will be very short because we have a very long and deep agenda and we only have an hour today. But the first reflection, which is really something that probably most of you already have realized, is that if we want to use data to improve children's lives, it really comes down to partnerships. Quite often the data you need, you don't have. And so you need to really establish this kind of collaboration with data holders or with data users themselves. Quite often the expertise you need, either to analyze the data, but also to contextualize the insights, you don't quite often have in-house. And so you really need to also broaden your pool of expertise through partnership. And then you actually also need to bring the ones that can act upon the insights in order to improve the lives of children to the table, so that we actually don't only create insights, but also immediately inform action that can actually lead to an improvement of the well-being of children worldwide. And that requires partnerships. It requires a new kind of public-private partnership that we quite often didn't have before, quite often because we didn't really focus on the data ecosystem that needs to be in place in order to really leverage insight and knowledge in a way that can become more evidence-based policy making. And so it turns out, and that's my second remark, is that partnerships is not easy. And it actually is a complicated act in order to bring the different parties to the table, to think about their incentives, to think about what is actually the core question that we seek to answer, what's the data we need, and so on. And I've been delighted to see that the Data for Children's Collaborative has really done a tremendous job in developing a methodology that allows us to take out the transaction costs of establishing partnerships. And that really does so in a rigorous and responsible manner by bringing parties to the table, by thinking about what is the core question that needs to be answered, what's the minimum viable data sets that needs to be brought to the table, how do we do this in a responsible way, how do we match demand and supply, and then subsequently, how do we make sure that we act upon the insight once insight has been generated. And that methodology has been honed for the last 3.5 years, and delighted to also see that based upon the basic experimentation and then subsequently honing of the methodology, we are now in a phase where the Data for Children's Collaborative can move into a new phase where they will provide data collaboration as a service, meaning bringing new kinds of capabilities and new kinds of services and make it available to a broader audience than we initially had. Because the initial audience was obviously UNICEF, and UNICEF remains a key partner, but I think we are ready to move into a new phase, which is why we have today's call as well, to really call upon partners beyond the UNICEF ecosystem, but also partners that really have an interest in obviously improving people's and children's lives as such. And so before we go into detail about what has already been achieved and what the data collaboration as a service means, let me ask Lucinda, who has been there from the beginning and was one of the initiators behind the whole effort, and of course also represents UNICEF on today's call. Let me ask Lucinda to also reflect on the lessons learned over the 3.5 years, but also the value that the Data for Children's Collaborative has brought to UNICEF, so that we also have an external party, in fact, a key partner in the effort, reflect on the potential that the Data for Children's Collaborative can also bring to your organization. Over to you, Lucinda.
Thanks, Stefan. Yes, I'm not a data scientist at all, but I just want to reflect, having been on the journey from the beginning. I guess we started working on this initiative in about 2017 in recognition of the data expertise in Scotland and at the University of Edinburgh. And whilst UNICEF does have more data on women and children than any other organisation in the world, we recognise we needed more expertise and more data, as Stefan mentioned. And this partnership has offered us some of these solutions. You will hear me use one word frequently in the next 2 minutes, and that's children, because UNICEF is about upholding the rights of every child, and that's our mandate. I think it's worth, before we go any further, reflecting on the situation for children today, because we could probably argue that the situation for them is worse now than it was when we launched the Data for Children Collaborative in 2019. So today, children are facing more challenges than ever before. The impact of COVID-19 means that there are millions of children who have not returned to education and millions more that have not received their routine vaccinations. And coupled with the current economic crisis, their future is looking increasingly bleak. Today, I think about 1 billion children are living in countries that are severely impacted by climate change. Recently, we've seen this play out in the catastrophic floods in Pakistan and the food crisis that's playing out in the East and Southern Africa. And the Data for Children Collaborative has helped us tremendously with understanding the impact of climate change, with their input into our Children's Climate Risk Index, which is a seminal piece of work. So in 2015, the global community came together to agree the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and UNICEF supports 12 of these goals. And the stark reality is that we are falling way behind and will not meet the commitments we made in 2015. But data, research, and evidence are key elements of UNICEF's 2022-25 strategic plan to help us meet those commitments to children. It helps us I think from my perspective, it will help us get a better picture of their situation, deliver more effective interventions or programs for these children, and deliver better evidence to our government and funding partners. But we can't do this on our own. We need to collaborate with academics, funders, and data specialists, and that's the stark reality. You're going to hear from some of my colleagues later on specific data collaborations undertaken for UNICEF. And these are giving us really important new insight into some of the greatest challenges affecting children around the world. But before we start, I'd like to bring in Chris. So Chris Speed is the director of the Edinburgh Futures Institute and our partner at the University of Edinburgh. And Chris, it'd be really helpful to understand how the Data for Children Collaborative aligns with the Edinburgh Future Institute and the university's strategy and priorities.
Sure, thanks, and thanks for involving me. It's been a pleasure. I mean, I joined EFI just like working in the engineering, a lowly architect for the past few years, but I became director in May. So in that short time, what's been extraordinary is understanding how I demonstrate, along with colleagues, what it is we do as a research innovation hub. So I'm not a school. I don't represent a school. We've got brilliant schools. You know, Edinburgh brings law to informatics, to design, through to the best anthropology departments. But EFI stands outside that as a space for innovation, exploration, and perhaps to rethink what the services of academics do in the world, not looking upon the world, not some privileged ivory tower perspective, but really allowing us to rethink true engagement. And actually, you mentioned, I think early on, this idea, what does the collaboration do for us and for you? Well, it breaks down those barriers. It opens up bridges. It represents entirely new, I hope you don't mind me saying, products and services. Because at the moment, if you think about what the products and services of an academic it might be, if I ask my mum, she's going to think teaching, writing papers, maybe winning some grants with my mum's money. So actually entirely rethinking the engagement and the responsibility. Our strapline is challenge, create, change. And critically, if we want change in the world, we're going to have to measure it. And I do think what Alex has done in the team is really demonstrate the power of measurement. Lots of academics can talk about opportunities for challenges, opportunities for change, but we're not that good at using systematic methods to do the measurement, to then pass on insights toward programs that I think you, Lucinda, know how and have better insight now how to deliver. And I'd love it if EFI can keep adopting Alex's great methods and Fraser's great methods, that this is how we do research and innovation in the world or with the world. Now, do I pass that back to Alex or throw it back? Is that right, Alex? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah,
I mean,
I think
it's outstanding. But
I think that's I think both, well, what all three of you have just said are a real testament to what we've been trying to do. Really, is how do we systematically think about building the best team to bring the best set of minds together to address these complex challenges, and to, you know, use those really burgeoning academic minds and place them up against the people that are doing the day-to-day operational in the field work with children, and that bringing those minds together and being, what I've said in the past, a translator of sorts, allowing people to talk about very technical, complex ideas, and then other people to say, well, what about the human element, and have we thought about this, and have we actually talked to children, and allowing the right space for those conversations to happen, as well as thinking about delivery and having milestones and getting things out such that we've got the right adoption for any insights or outputs at the end as well. So I'm really pleased with the set of audience we've got joining throughout that call. It's brilliant, and I hope you guys can review in the chat who's online, and I'm really also hoping that we can start a conversation within the chat about getting questions as we're talking, and we'll try and weave them into the conversation. So I think the slides are going to go back up momentarily. Thank you to Stefan and Chris and Lucinda as well for your brilliant input there. And I know you guys will stay on, be there ready for answers. I've got a cat meowing next to me, so I apologize for that. That's really hybrid situation there. You can't do a hybrid call with that cat. So yeah, just a little summary slide there to show what we're all about. And then I want to move on to the next slide, which just profiles what our themes are that we work on. So just a reminder, today we are launching a website refresh, which is super exciting, and you will find all the information about these themes on here. But we're going to highlight conversations around climate change, around population, and around poverty today. But we've got so much other stuff going on, and I know some of you are in the audience today who've worked on recent education challenge that we've done, or are working on our current nutrition challenge, which also brings in kind of seasonality aspects about it. So we've got really exciting stuff going on, and we're going to only profile 2 today. We might have to end up doing more webinars so that we can talk to more people in this way. But I think if Ivona, you can bring up Fraser and Shan and Sophie to the conversation. We are going to just take a little dive into our climate change project. So we're doing 15 minutes per project. And Shan and Sophie, Shan, I'll let you introduce yourself, and Sophie, I'll let you introduce yourself, because I don't know everybody's job titles officially, so I don't want to do anyone a disservice by introducing them inappropriately. But we've got a slide up that kind of talks through our climate change project. Sophie and Shan are going to give us a little bit of an introduction, and then Fraser and I are going to just probe their introduction and how it all worked, because we really want to get into the guts of what it's like working in these collaborative teams and how the Data for Children Collaborative supports that, and what we want to investigate that. So please, again, feel free to add questions into the chat as well. So Shan, Sophie, over to you guys with an introduction, please.
Thanks, Alex. I am Shan Henley from the University of Edinburgh, and I'm a reader in marine science.
Great, and I'll come in next. Nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Sophie. I'm a climate change consultant in the Climate, Energy, Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction team, which is quite the mouthful, at UNICEF in the headquarters. And back to you, Alex.
So, Shan, I think we're passing on to you to give a bit of an introduction to the climate change project. So this is one that we worked with UNICEF to develop as a question. We ran one of our impact collaborations to build a multidisciplinary team around the question. And we've had quite a number of outputs and impact from this project. So Shan, can I hand over to you just to give us a bit of an overview of what this project is, or Sophie, whoever's going first out of you two.
I think it's me, yeah. So we came together as a team of natural scientists, social scientists, practitioners, and data end users. And we put together an index of the risk that children experience from the different impacts of climate change. So we quantified the risks from 8 factors that are related to climate. Those are heat waves, water scarcity, floods from both rivers and along the coasts, tropical cyclones, vector-borne diseases like malaria, air pollution, and soil and water pollution. And then we combined those with indicators of child health and welfare and education, water, sanitation and hygiene, their level of poverty and social protection, and their position within their communities, and therefore their actual agency to do anything about the situation that they were under. So we combined all of these variables and came up with an index for climate risk for children at the global scale. And we actually focused in for our most recent publication on the impacts of heat waves, with the recent increase in the impacts of these events and their huge societal relevance, particularly for children because of their increased vulnerability. And so we found that in 2020, there were 560 million children at risk of increases in the frequency of heat waves occurring. We then projected that to 2050 under a low emissions, optimistic climate change scenario, where there would be approximately 1.7 degrees of warming by 2050, and another high emissions scenario, which is akin to the worst case scenario, with up to 2.4 degrees of warming at the global scale by 2050. And we found that under either of those scenarios, every single child on Earth would be at increased risk from heat waves by 2050 compared to 2020. So that could suggest that there's no point doing any climate change policy because the situation is going to be dire either way. But that's why we looked at different indicators and different drivers of climate change impacts on children. And we found that one of the most important was the duration, so how long these events last. And we found that in 2020, there were 540 million children at risk. And under the low emissions scenario, this number increases to 1.6 billion. Under that very high emissions scenario, this number increases to over 1.9 billion. So policy makes a huge difference, and that's policy around climate change mitigation and adaptation. And the children at risk of these impacts are, of course, that the risk is much greater in the poorest countries, where children are already most vulnerable to changes in their environment. So the overall conclusion of this work as a whole is that there is a high imperative for governments to urgently limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and to double the amount of funding available for adaptation in the next 2 years by 2025. I'll stop there for now.
Brilliant, thank you, Shan. Sophie. A bit of an introduction to the project from your side, from a kind of challenge owner side.
Yeah, happy to come in. I think Sian did an excellent job of sort of giving an overview of the project itself. But yeah, I think just to chime in and say that the project's really been important to sort of generate new global evidence on both how many children are exposed currently to climate and environmental shocks and the vulnerabilities associated, but also to give the first real comprehensive view of climate risk from a child perspective. There's many different sort of climate indexes out there, but none that are really focusing in on children's risks. And we know that children are uniquely vulnerable. So that was something that was definitely missing, and the data that we generated with the collaborative was really fantastic and has had an impact on the global scale. Yeah, I think other than that, just as Sian highlighted, just some of the work we've been doing since the global model was created is doing some of the climate modeling and projection analysis that we've done with the heat waves. And I think maybe just to note that alongside engaging key stakeholders and governments and also the programmatic side, we're making sure that we're trying to engage youth as strongly as possible in the process alongside this. One of the great achievements of the heatwave report, for example, was that we promoted this alongside Vanessa Nakate, who's one of the most prominent youth global activists in the world at the moment. So yeah, it's been a fantastic achievement.
Brilliant, thanks, Sophie. And I've not yet introduced Fraser in our team, who's going to be the sidekick for our conversations today. So this is Fraser, who's our head of delivery and innovation. So yeah, we wanted to have a conversation around the project and the work with Data for Children Collaborative, with both kind of the academic input as well as the kind of challenge owner and the adoption piece as well. And I know, Sophie, that you've just briefly mentioned some of the key outcomes that UNICEF were hoping to achieve by starting this piece on climate and children's risk in relation to climate. Can you talk to us a bit more about like what it felt like to have this bank of data and information when you attended both of the COP conferences and how you used it as an advocacy tool?
Yeah, more than happy to. So I think one of the key parts of the data is that it really helps us understand where and how children are uniquely vulnerable to climate change. And that's crucial both for targeting effective programmatic responses, but also in terms of advocacy and really outlining where and how we need to act. So the CCI really helps us prioritize where children are most at risk, where we need to increase the adaptation and resilience for social services. So whether that be improving healthcare centres, increasing the resilience at schools or wash facilities. And it's also an important piece of work to inspire other key researchers and organisations to look at climate change from a child vulnerability perspective. So it's important as an evidence tool, an advocacy tool. We took this data to COP26 in Glasgow and then also leveraged it at COP27 in Egypt. And we really used the data and evidence to make the case that we need to prioritise children and young people, both in climate finance, policy and action plans, especially at the national level, but also that we need to build young people's adaptive capacity to make sure that they're prepared to live in a climate change world.
Brilliant. From our point of view, kind of being on the sidelines of COP, going along, meeting up with people in COP at Glasgow, or hearing about you guys meeting in Glasgow, it really has felt like there's such a much louder voice for children in that space. So it's lovely to be able to kind of contribute to the evidence behind that as well. Fraser, I'm going to bring you into the conversation. Do you want to pose a question to Sian?
Yeah, I think and thanks for that, Zoe. And it's always great to kind of reflect on the immense kind of output and impact from that work. But I think I want to think back just to the project team itself. And for this project, it really was, a multidisciplinary team working from very different perspectives. And even in your introduction, Sian, you mentioned, you're a reader in marine science. Now, someone might not automatically make that jump from marine science to this project. And it'd be great to kind of get your reflections on just what it was like for you working on such a transdisciplinary piece of work. Is that something you've done before? Are you used to working that way? And, how close does this piece of work align to what you do on a day-to-day basis?
for the question, Fraser. I think it's a really interesting one, actually, and it makes me smile every time I think about it. I've never had the opportunity to work in such a diverse transdisciplinary team with so many different perspectives, so many different ideas, in some cases completely different ways of thinking, which in some ways is a challenge as well as an opportunity. But you mentioned that most of my work is around the oceans and climate change. So that's the link. But you are right to think that it's not normally focused initially on the people, and that's why this project is different. And in comparing the two, I would reflect on the fact that when I do my ocean science, there are kind of three main phases in the value chain. There's scientific research, and then there's the translation and the summarizing and the synthesizing for policymakers. And then there's the policy and driving of societal change. We do get there, but there are more steps in the process. It takes longer. There's a greater need for refinement. So more of the research is lost, I guess, compared to what we started with versus what actually gets communicated to the people where it matters. Whereas with this project, because we were working directly with UNICEF, there was that direct connection from the beginning, which enabled us to co-develop the project together and to co-work throughout the duration. There was a lot of backwards and forwards, there was coming and going, there was different versions of what we were doing until we got to the point that the researchers were happy with what was done, and UNICEF were happy, and the practitioners along the way were happy, and we were all satisfied that what we were doing was the result that we were aiming for the children ultimately. So I think that is the value hugely of these transdisciplinary pieces. And I would also mention that having that link with the UNICEF comms infrastructure, communications infrastructure, gave our work the impact that we as researchers just can't even dream of. So that is a huge opportunity for us, but also for the importance of the work. And I guess building on that, the way that we were able to so effectively integrate the natural sciences, the social sciences, and the policymakers and advocacy organization brought a relevance and a priority to the work that we struggle to achieve when any of those things work independently of each other. And as Sophie reflected on, this ultimately led to us being able to make a really big stand and do some really influential work in the framework of the United Nations climate change conferences, which led to real impact. And that's just hugely inspiring for me as a researcher.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think, I and Alex as well, we have the luxury across all our projects of kind of witnessing our teams grow into these challenges that we present. And if I think on this one, at the very beginning, when I had my conversations with UNICEF about it, I always say to them, this group are going to challenge you. They are being brought in to challenge your thinking on this problem and to just unpick it and go, are you really thinking about this the right way? Are you thinking about it? And that's the whole point of this. But to create the space where that can happen. Then if I think to the end of the project, UNICEF kind of almost threw it back at you and went, well, in terms of a comms perspective, we're going to challenge you now because you've got to meet this pretty intense demand that UNICEF would pose to kind of fit into that very big comms machine. And it was amazing to see the output of that. And it was quite a nice kind of balance, I think, when you look at it holistically at the whole project.
Yeah, I think I would agree, Fraser. I think as well what you were saying, Shan, there about the kind of adaptability or the flexibility, the co-working element of what you were saying. Yes, there was a planned output and outcome that was agreed and went through our governance board and was all set in stone at the beginning. But you have to, as in project delivery in life, you have to take changes and movements in scope, and being able to do that together the whole way through, I think is really important to then everyone be bought into whatever adapted output we had at the end. I don't think that would be the same without having the challenge owner really threaded into the project team and really part of the delivery cycle. Because I think if you got a commission and could you please produce a children's climate risk index, go away, come back in 9 months or a year and go, here you go, here's what we did. And they go, oh my God, we didn't mean that. You know, and this is what this whole hand holding through the life cycles are all about.
Yeah, and I would reflect that even just from the research side, when we started the project, we didn't know what the outcomes were going to be. So that's why we did it, right? So we had to be adaptable to what the most significant findings were, and working with UNICEF to really optimize the value of the results was, for me, a real learning curve, but one that was well worth going through, because it made me see value in a different way to what I've learned as a scientist. And I now understand it in a much more holistic way.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. So I guess the final question, it's very easy to talk about the positives here and to talk about how, you know, wonderful it is collaborating and co-creating this project and delivering it. But I'm wanting to kind of open this question up to both of you. You know, what were the challenges in working this way? Like what was really quite, you know, in the name of transparency, which is one of our kind of core values, it'd be great to hear from yourselves as to what was difficult and what was, you know, kind of pushed you a little bit. And it'd be great to hear from yourself as well, Sophie, about that.
Yeah, happy to come in. Always a difficult question, Fraser, because I have to say overall it worked fantastically. But I think maybe linking to what Alex and Sian reflected on in terms of having to be adaptable and flexible, I think maybe one of the key challenges was the time zones and working with people in different areas of the world, because I think at one time we had colleagues from Australia, Bangkok, New York, Edinburgh, all on calls trying to work on the project and working within those realms. But I guess the benefit of having that is that you can really tap into virtual and interdisciplinary methods. So yeah, and I guess.
Oh, I think we've lost you there, Sophie. Sorry. Which is one of the challenges of these kind of projects and remote working, is the connections dropping off in various time zones. So that's almost neatly encapsulated in that very act. Sian, I don't know if you've got anything you want to build on top of that.
Having a couple of microphone issues, so I keep swapping between mics. Apologies for that. Yes, I think it's an important question for transparency, as you said, but also for lessons learned in moving forward. So I guess that's the point of view that I would answer it from. It was difficult to begin with to understand each other. And I'm going to be completely honest, you know, we had natural scientists coming from very climate projections focus, from the kind of global impacts of climate change. We had social scientists, we had data experts, we had advocates and policymakers from UNICEF, and even things like speaking the same languages, understanding what we were trying to achieve, using the same three-letter acronyms. It was a learning curve and it took time. So I think it's fair to say at the beginning of the project, we didn't make progress as rapidly as we would have done if we'd all started from the same position. But ultimately, the fact that we started from those different positions brought the richness and the diversity that the project really needed. So it was a learning curve that we all had to go through, but it was well worth doing, because if we hadn't had such a rich diversity of expertise, insight, perspectives, then we'd never have been able to achieve what we have achieved so far and what is still to come. And I guess that leads me to my final point about the challenge, which is that there was far more work to do than there was time or budget to support. So I would say that there is a huge amount that could still be achieved, both with the research that we've already done in terms of releasing more of that, providing more detailed publications and policy pieces, And then, of course, with another magical tranche of funding, that there's a huge amount more we could do with this project. So I guess my positive note would be to kind of to stay tuned for that, and hopefully we'll be able to carry the project forward, because a potential risk to the risk project is that we don't maximize on the outputs that are still to come because we shift focuses and do something else. So I think it's really important to make sure that the full body of that work that we've done, not just the heat waves work, is released and has the same impact and makes the same change in the world that the heat waves report did.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Shan. And I think part of that real desire to use the hard work and the evidence and the knowledge that's been built up there, part of my desire on top of that is to really capitalize on this amazing team that we've now built up. And we've done the kind of forming, norming, storming, and now we just want to keep performing and keep delivering as this transdisciplinary team. So I'm really excited about what could come next in the climate change piece that we've been working on. So time-wise, I would absolutely love to talk about this project with you guys all day, and I suspect I'm going to feel like this on all the projects that we're about to talk about, but we're going to, and unfortunately we lost Sophie, who has been lost to Wi-Fi issues. We're going to move on to our next conversation. So big thanks to Sophie and Shan for their contribution. And our next conversation is about our population projects. I think Ivona is going to magically put up a slide about a population project that we've actually been working on for a longer amount of time. And I'm going to introduce Sohan Seth and Viviana Canyon. And I will allow them to again give their formal job titles rather than me mucking it up when they start speaking. But we've been working with Sohan for a number of years now on a couple of projects, and from my point of view, it's just what's been lovely about the population project is that evolution and growth of an idea and the constant contacts. In the last climate change discussion, we were talking about that partnering with the challenge owner and partnering with UNICEF, and this is another lovely example of keeping in touch and building on a concept or an idea with that constant input from UNICEF in terms of what's actually going to be useful as an output or a product. So Sohan and Viviana, I'm going to let you similarly do a bit of a 5-minute overview on what we have actually been delivering as a project. And then we've got a couple of kind of conversational pieces to chat through. So Sohan, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Alex. I'm Sohan. I'm the lead data scientist at the School of Informatics here at the University of Edinburgh. And as Alex pointed out, I've been leading one of the longest and slowest running project with the Data for Children Collaborative on population estimation.
I guess you want me to introduce myself, Alex? Well, I'm Viviana Canyon. I am Partnership Manager for the Frontier Data Network, working for UNICEF, the Division of Data and Analytics.
Thanks, Viviana. Sohan. So Sohan, do you want to kick off with a bit of an overview of what this project has been about? That'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Alex. Yeah, I'd love to do that. So I think I can give a very brief overview of what we have been trying to achieve for the last almost 3 years since the project started. And due to COVID, things slowed down a bit in the middle, but things have now picked up since then again with other projects pouring in. So I think everyone in this call definitely appreciate that the idea of where people live or estimate the population is definitely very crucial and vital piece of information for development monitoring and other issues. And also population can change quite rapidly, at least locally over time due to migration, disaster and other situations. So how do you monitor population? What the best approach is to look at census data and what census data can become obsolete over time, and they are done usually every 10 years, if not more. And the standard approach of getting finer grain population estimate from the census data, which is available at a more broad enumeration level, is called population disaggregation, where you take the census data and you use satellite imagery or local remote sensing signal to disaggregate the population on a finer grid. But since census has issues with being conducted every 10 years or so, other approaches which have become popular and which UNICEF approached us with was to take a census independent approach. The census independent approach works with microcensus data, so it is quite small household surveys. To give you an example, microcensus can be done at a level of thousands of households compared to census, which can be done at a national level. And the idea here is that if we know at a smaller scale where people live locally, then we can use that information to sort of develop a predictive model to try to estimate where people live or how many people live in the areas we have not taken any surveys from. So that is what we call bottom-up approach compared to the previous top-down approach, including or involving census. But bottom-up approach is quite challenging as well, because you have to use different geospatial signal to figure out how to build that prediction model to do that. And so that was the problem we started with. And our goal was to look at or build a population estimation model, which is sort of more sustainable and also accurate. And for that, we started developing a more AI machine learning driven model, which will be looking only at the very high resolution satellite imagery and looking at that image, try to predict how many people live in that region. And this is probably a very commonplace problem we have seen everywhere nowadays with AI, trying to look at an image and trying to figure out something about the image. For example, if the image, is there a dog or cat in the image? And the difference that we had was, rather than seeing classes in the image of whether there is a dog or cat, we are trying to find out how many people live there. Maybe 5 people live there, or maybe 20 people or 100 people live in that area. So that's the approach we took. And what we observed is that we believe that the pipeline we developed are definitely accurate and sustainable. And what we effectively doing from machine learning perspective is that we are taking a model or AI model, which have been trained on a lot of data to begin with, and take that model, but try to teach the model from small amount of data coming from microsensors, because they are definitely much smaller than sensors, to understand what or how many people live in a certain area, looking at the satellite imagery. So that's a very brief description of the project that we have been developing. And the model that we developed, we named it SCIPE, which stands for Sustainable Census Independent Population Estimation. And maybe I can stop there. And if you have any more questions, I can elaborate a bit more later.
Thanks, Sohan. Sohan was under strict instructions to do layman's terms, because we're not going for a data science presentation. So thank you, Sohan, for actually explaining that in ways that everybody can understand.
Hopefully.
Viviana, anything you want to add in terms of an introduction to the project from the UNICEF angle?
No, not really. I think Sohan really explained well the scope of the project, and then what we wanted to do at the beginning. It was focused, and it is still focused in Mozambique, but we all see the potential to scale up this to other places. So, and the focus is more immunization. So of course, this is the use cases we see about the project. So maybe if I can explain a little bit, what these use cases can be. So in general, UNICEF is working almost in every country in the world, but sometimes the data we have about children is very is not updated. So we have governments and also UNICEF country offices making decisions on data that is very old. So many mistakes can be made there. So of course, that's why the importance of a project like this. The use of these estimates is mainly for interventions, health services interventions, vaccinations, where are the children the most vulnerable? How can we vaccinate them? How can we deliver campaigns for them to understand, where are the health centers and the services we can provide. Also on policy and advocacy with more accurate information about children. It's possible for UNICEF to understand, how can we advise other partners like governments to see, how can we deliver best responses for children. And of course, in terms of advocacy, is to identify where are the most vulnerable ones so we can act. UNICEF knows, the population estimation is not something we can do it by ourselves. So we need to work with others, and then we need to prioritize efforts. So when we saw this opportunity to work with Sohan and all the team, we identified, this is something we can contribute and something we can do together. There are some other organizations out there working on population estimation, World Pop, Grid 3, but what we can do that is different? So we can also support global efforts and do something that is even better. So yeah, I wanted to add this to Sohan's presentation. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Viviana. And I think what I was reflecting on is actually the connectivity or the intersectionality of some of the themes that we work on at the Data for Children Collaborative. Thinking back to the previous project on climate change, where population is a massive factor in that index that we built, and having granularity of population estimation is so important for these kind of initiatives where we want to go at higher resolution on the climate piece. Having a really accurate estimate and being able, ultimately we could look at projections and everything, but right now we're looking at how real time can we look at population estimation to be able to look at what interventions and programs can we put in place. So Sohan, similar to the last team, I just wanted to reflect with you on what the actual advantages of working so closely with UNICEF on this project have been for you, and whether that's something, again, kind of from a research point of view, is that something that you have had happen a lot when you're building up data science models and working with your PDRAs, or is that quite unusual?
No, it has been a bit different because I feel that the research we have been conducting has been more translational than more something of academic, purely of academic interest. And I think from that perspective, the couple of areas I think which we had benefited a lot are in terms of understanding the relevance of the problem, understanding the impact of the problem, and also, as you pointed out, Alex, working on the problem over many years, trying to make the solution as mature as possible. And to give you an example of what I'm trying to sort of elaborate here is that, so when we started the project, we figured out after subsequent discussion that we will be developing a model which will look at satellite images and trying to predict how many people live there. And that's, as I pointed, it's quite standard computer vision type of AI problem where there have been many solutions already. But to do that, what was different in this particular project, I think, was the relevance of it, that we wanted to make those estimates more trustworthy to the end user and more explainable, and try to attach uncertainty and explainability to it. And that's what was driving us. And also, we also felt that one of the main impacts should be trying to make this pipeline as sustainable as possible, so it can be reused in different areas. And that's something we're doing right now, trying to check the transferability. And that relevance and the sort of expected impact of the problem is definitely a bit different from a pure academic setting, where we're doing research which might become translation rise promising later on down the line. But this is something we started where we had translation in mind to begin with, that we have to give this estimate, which can be trusted. And so people look at the estimate, they're like, wait a minute, what's going on here? People don't live there, something like that. And the other point that you pointed out correctly was the maturity of the project. To begin with, we started the project in Mozambique with 2 districts. And what we wanted to do is that we wanted to check the transferability of the model to other districts in Mozambique, which unfortunately did not happen, partly due to COVID-19. But later on, we started working on a new project with UNICEF in Guinea, which is currently running now. And it's quite amazing that the data we are currently working with, which is in Guinea, it is a city which is very different than the rural area in Mozambique that we looked at. And that gives us a contrast in trying to figure out whatever we did in a different area, is it similarly applicable when we move to a different country and completely different area, and try to check the transferability of the model. And if we can fix the transferability, and if we know that it is doing quite well as we expect it to do well, then definitely we can solve this problem at a much larger scale. So to make the problem more, or solution more mature. So I think these are the 3 or more things I think which we benefit a lot with working with stakeholder directly and understanding the problem that we are solving and why we are solving that particular problem.
That's great. Thanks for that, Sohan. I think, and I kind of almost want to kind of, for Viviana, just as a kind of closing comment, I suppose, on this project is I just want to flip that question almost into, we've talked a bit about how advantageous it is for you as an academic to work with UNICEF. And it kind of builds a little bit on what Lucinda was opening up with at the beginning. What is the advantage been to UNICEF in engaging with an academic partner to work with this kind of breadth of data that you've got? And I know, and we've got a lot of content to go through, so I guess it's more of a kind of, it's your opportunity to kind of close up your kind of thoughts on this, Viviana, in terms of what you think has been the advantage to UNICEF, this piece of work.
Yeah, thank you, Fraser. So partnerships for us at UNICEF are fundamental. Because understanding how to use these new data techniques is something so new for an organization as UNICEF. Private sector, other industries are using big data, artificial intelligence since 20 years ago or maybe more. But for organizations like us, it's something really new. So we need to be partnering with the best top leads and also universities to understand better how to navigate in this frontier data world. So for us, it was key within this project to have the academia and this technical team behind, so we were sure about the outputs of this, because we cannot go and say to a government of a country office, these outputs are great, let's use it. But it's easier for us to say, we did this together with the academia, so this is robust enough for you to use it. So I think that's something that is really important to highlight. And finally, impact. If we want to have impact, we need to develop initiatives like this that can not only benefit one country, but some others. So this is something, also a component we would like to explore more, the scalability of a project like this. So of course, we're doing this in Mozambique and Guinea, but what about doing this in other places? So I think this is good for us to be part of a project like this, in which we can take advantage of these teams and expertise.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Viviana. And that's just a wonderful way to kind of close off that kind of this amazing piece of work and this project's going on, is that idea of how do we grow that beyond just what we've been working on. And we speak so often about kind of proof of concepts or case studies, and something that we're always looking at in our projects is that, how does that transfer beyond just that proof of concept or that kind of small case study? And it's always good to have UNICEF in the conversation, just keeping that in the back of their mind of, right, and how does this apply beyond this piece of work? So I guess, Alex, am I right in saying we're going to move on to the next project?
next project. So thank you so much, Sohan and Viviana, for sharing with us your thoughts on population estimation project. Again, loads of information on our website if you want to read more about that, or go and look at GitHub for the actual code that Sohan and his team have been working on, if you're of that technical mindset. So we're going to introduce Celeste Berteau and David Eccles for our third case study project. And this one we have been working on with the Promise. And again, I'm going to let Celeste and David do their introductions as to who they are. But this is, for us, this is a really lovely example of a collaborative project, again, where we've used our impact collaborations process to pull together academic and private sector team and to really keep that centralized focus of children on what could be a very data focused project, but I would call it a child focused project about data. And I think what's really nice about this case study and bringing this conversation in today is we've now got one of our private sector partners who've been working alongside the Promise and academic partners and other consultant partners as well on this wide project to talk about their experience. You know, private sector, do they normally work like this? So I'm going to let Celeste and David introduce themselves and do a bit of an introduction as to what the project actually is. And then again, we will ask them some questions. So Celeste, over to you.
Sure. Hi. So I'm Celeste Berteau. I am the Doing Data Differently manager at the Promise Scotland. And David, do you want to introduce yourself, and then I'll give a quick overview?
Sure, I'm David Eccles from Wolfscope. My interest primarily words and pictures, storytelling, and how that fits into the data cycle, because as we all know, the story's in the data, isn't it?
So just to give a bit of a kind of a broader picture, ours is a bit different than the two case studies that have come before us, and that it's a much more specific problem as opposed to a global one. So for those of you who don't know, the Promise was one of 7 reports that was published at the end of the Independent Care Review here in Scotland. It captures kind of the review's findings overall, and essentially it lays out the goal for what care should look like for children and young people who need to be supported by the state, whether that's being looked after at home or living with family or foster carers away from home, living in a residential home or school or secure care setting. The Promise Scotland, which is the organization that I work for, was set up to provide support to Scotland as a whole to help us all keep the promise to these children and young people by 2030. So what was found in the care review is that our data landscape here in Scotland is currently, quite frankly, is not capable of keeping the promise. It's siloed. It doesn't give us the insights that we need to make real improvements in real time. We've got lots of data about things that directly and indirectly impact on children and their families, but at the moment, there really isn't a way of finding out what that information is, who holds it, how it's captured, how it's used, how it's shared, what it's used for, right? And most of this information is centered around monitoring and reporting, right? It's primarily about what the system needs and less about what children and families themselves need. So the Promise Scotland really wanted to find a way to kind of do data differently, hence my job title, and addressing the kind of above points. So we knew we had a problem to solve. We had some ideas about potential solutions, but we also didn't really want to be limited by our own thinking and our own understandings. So we went to Alex and Fraser, and it's funny for me to be the one talking about this because I only came in May. So I'm the one of the 4 of us who wasn't actually in the room at this point. But the Promise Scotland went to Alex and Fraser, and they kind of helped reframe this as our collaborative challenge question, which is, quite frankly, just what data does Scotland collect and analyze that both indirectly and directly impacts the lives of children and their families? And how can we best map it? Like, how do we see it? So the team that assembled to answer that question included ourselves, and obviously the Data for Children Collaborative, the Fraser of Allender Institute out of the University of Strathclyde, South Ayrshire's Health and Social Care Partnership, Celsus, an academic from Indiana Tech, and Wallscope, who David's here representing today, our tech partners. So this was a really exploratory project. There's a lot of deep thinking about and experimenting with kind of what that best approach was to address this really complex issue. And so the very, very short version of the answer to that is the resulting product, which is the Promise Data Map, which is a tool, essentially, kind of to call back to what Stefan said at the beginning, right? A data collaboration as a service, right? We believe this tool will be able to help organizations and the sector in general better understand their own data, which will in turn help them streamline their data collection, reduce duplication, improve efficiency. It'll help, us all kind of have better information and work in a more joined up holistic way. And it will, with a little bit of luck, it'll enable those who support children and families to ensure that the data that they use to make decisions is actually really reflecting what matters to those who they're supporting. So that's the really whistle-stop version. David, did you want to add to that from kind of the tech perspective?
I'm glad you used the word silo. That was one major problem in this endeavour, and at some point it felt a little bit like an archaeological dig in the kind of digital world, because there was these layers and layers, and everyone thought they had something. So we really wanted to understand the value of the data, which really focused on the value of the metadata. And so in as much as we weren't collecting data on individual children, we were collecting data about data. So this gives us this concept of a map. And then any good map, you really know where you're going if you've got a good compass and some navigational points. But of course, if you think of a map, you think of a location, a territory. So we have to think about map concept as well. But we do have a geographical map. Because what we really wanted to do was look at the value of the data and focus on its utility, its prospective value that it could be used for, but it could be better accessed. So we really wanted to do that because we want to provide information, not data focus, information focus, and really what's the value of knowledge here and what insight broadly can you get, and what's its reuse value as well? What better decisions can you take? How might you change? And I think this concept of innovation, which come back to this environment to do it, I think it was Peter Drucker who said, if you want to do something new, stop doing something old, or broadly, that the kind of change there. But on the technical solution, we need to contextually relate information through search and discovery. And you can only do that if you can link the data. But to do that, you have to understand the data and what you're linking to in a kind of framework, which needs then stuffed into a database or some sort of knowledge store. But we provided a knowledge graph solution. So that requires a specific type of data store because it's an ideal approach to relate information based on a range of concepts, locations, organizations as well. And if you think of that as a spherical shape, anyone can stand in there. It's like getting a lift. You can choose what floor you want to go to. So this concept of navigation is maybe not a geographical one, but maybe more of a floor marker in an airport or something. If you go in there, go there. If you want this, go there. So this concept of map, but which is a really interesting project. But primarily also, let's try and link it to what matters to children, because they're the ones who are going to use it. And that kind of semiotic type indicators coming from the data did require semantic structure of the data. So, an apple has to be an apple, and we know it's a subset of fruit, for example. So ordering and structuring the data model, I thought was really interesting because it's quite new.
Thanks, David, and thanks Thanks for the introduction, Celeste, as well. I think it's such a inspiring project, this one, particularly as you were just saying there, David, around the keeping the what matters to children part at the centre of everything, and the input that the Fraser Valander Institute gave for that piece of work was phenomenal. Celeste, I'm kind of slightly going off very thin script that I gave originally, and just wanted to reflect on how it's felt. I mean, well, the main thing is the involvement from South Ayrshire Council, who we've used as a bit of a test bed for some of this, and tried to unpick a little bit with that, kind of honing in on one area. But I think you've had some really good conversations with our colleague Dawn from South Ayrshire Council, and I'd love for you to kind of be able to show it, tell everybody a little bit about how you felt in those conversations in terms of learnings from everybody.
Sure, yeah. So we're going to have a blog coming out from Dawn on in South Ayrshire, our partner there, shortly. I think it should be sometime this week, but I haven't gotten the exact date yet. But I'll make sure that you all have it, Alex and Fraser, so it can be shared around with everyone kind of in the room. It was an amazing conversation to have. It was just, I came out of that conversation just kind of skipping out of the room, because it's exactly what you want to hear in these kind of, you know, when you're reflecting back on, well, what was this experience like? So it was primarily a call between myself and Dawn saying, you know, what was this experience like for you? What did it feel like to be part of it? What did you get out of it as an organization? And I think it's just, I think one thing that came across really, really clearly was that it really broadened, she felt like it broadened her sense of both what ambitions they should have in terms of what data can do, but also in terms of what's actually possible. And I think that really echoed our feelings about why we wanted to be involved in this process and to begin with, right? Like it's very easy to kind of be limited by your own knowledge and your own lack of knowledge. And working in this really kind of inclusive, diverse partnership, it really did kind of push us to think a bit more about, well, what's actually possible here, and what can a good use of data that, you know, that really has children and families at the center, what can that look like? And so for South Ayrshire, that's meant, I mean, everything from very, very practical examples of knowing that this team over here and this providing this service, and this team over here providing this service actually both use the same data system, and so they could actually cross-reference their data, and there's not an IT barrier to that. It's just something that a human can start doing. So something very practical on that level that can be a fairly quick fix, versus something kind of broader and more, I guess, more kind of systemic, but just this understanding of senior leaders and kind of upper management having a better understanding of not only what data is out there and in their organization and how it's being used, but how it all links together. And so she felt, to kind of paraphrase her, she felt like she understood the vastness of those kind of the complexity of the interactions. I think she referred to it as a ball of spaghetti, right? Like, I mean, it's just this giant, massive stuff, but she felt that she understood that better. And then she felt therefore more enabled to challenge, question, push back, ask for what she needed to kind of inevitably to lead towards that better service and those better outcomes for children and their families. So yeah, I really recommend having a read when it's actually up on the website. It was absolutely a fantastic conversation to have with her.
Great stuff, thanks Les. And I know Fraser actually needs to hop off and go and save some children in another organisation. I say that very glibly, and I don't mean it quite as glibly, but he's on a board with Young Scott, so he's going to hop off to that. So no worries, Fraser, that you have to disappear. But David, I know that particularly at the beginning of the process, when we were forming this team, building this team, that you were really passionate about actually, you know, the social good that can come from a technical solution and being able to support these data for good initiatives. And also, you know, hearing Dorota speak from your team when she's been demonstrating the actual tool and talking about how much she's learned in this process. Got any kind of brief reflections on the type of challenge that you're working on in this environment?
I think there's social good to be had in technology. I don't know if it's always the thing you should lead on, but there's certain mindsets are involved in design and organization of information and coding and practice. They're actually very ethically driven, and they don't necessarily want to work at, I know, Tesco Bank or something. They actually want to leverage that into something which can feel that they can impact in the wider environment. So I'm glad you've said that, but it doesn't surprise me to hear that about the social motivation. I mean, we've as a business, we've collaborated a lot, and we constantly collaborate with us between data sources, organizations, stakeholders, technologies, emergent technologies. So we're continuously in collaboration anyway. And that is really important, because if you want to transform, you want to work in the transformation agenda, you have to be speaking to people, you have to be listening to them. And this idea of taking utility out of technology, you can't just come up with something like, I think the world's full of gaming apps, you know, so there's kind of people are not necessarily as interested in these things as actually transformative technologies, which are transformative at a social value. You know, the climate emergency is a really interesting way that technology has moved into that, with metadata on the Sustainable Development Goals. They're a really good organizing concept, and being centered on knowledge engineering has got a part to play, and people want to play that part.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. I really appreciate that. So just in the interest in time, I'm going to say thank you very much to Celeste and David for that overview of the Promise project. I think at the beginning, Celeste, you mentioned that this was not a global issue, but I think from our point of view, the Data for Children Collaborative, we've developed a methodology about building a tool to capture information with children at the center of it. So this is not a unique problem. The spaghetti bowl is not a unique problem to Scotland. And I know UNICEF were very interested in supporting that initiative when we were approving it at our board, because there's transferable methods, and it's all about making sure that we as an organization are sharing our knowledge as much as possible, and writing up reports, writing up methodologies, and putting those all out openly on our knowledge zone, which leads me to the sort of what's next in our resolutions piece. We have, as I mentioned earlier, done a bit of a website update today. So our logo has ever so subtly changed, and you can play a game of what was the old logo versus what's the logo now. But we have really updated the kind of project portfolio, the portfolio piece there, and all the outputs, because I think we as an organization should be singing about some of the knowledge and insight that's been built up, not only in terms of actionable insights, but also from the responsible innovation piece, the ethics, the safeguarding, the youth participation toolkits that we have. Always keen for people to either pick them up and try and make them their own, or to come and talk to us about how we've developed them, and for us to help others do similar things. From a slides point of view, Ivona, if you could pop up our service catalogue slide, we have effectively, over the last 3.5 years, developed methodologies, as we said, and Stefan can highlight that kind of evolution to data collaboration as a service. And we've kind of built this little framework, if you like, of what we think's needed to get from knowing there's an issue to having some impact. And we kind of break these things down in stages. And I guess what we're telling people on the webinar today is that this is very much a service that's open to lots of partners to come and join us to work on. So in terms of bringing the challenges, we'd love for third sector and public sector partners to be getting in touch, going, we've got this issue, we think data might be part of the solution, but we're not sure. Then we will absolutely kind of help talk you through and just like think maybe there's ways of breaking those down. So we're currently working with the Jamil Observatory, who are on the call as well, on stages kind of 1 and 2, where it's just sometimes really difficult when you've got massive wide stakeholder sets with, you know, competing priorities, to actually validate how you might break down that challenge into a workable piece. So we're kind of just profiling what those services are that we offer, and making sure that everybody on this call is aware of those, and making others aware in your networks as well, I guess. And the other thing, I think we could probably go slide down now, Ivona, is we're actually putting a shout out today for new membership on our advisory board. So we've got kind of like 3 to 4 positions available on our advisory as we kind of transition to being this specialist unit at the Edinburgh Futures Institute. And we're opening up, there's a nice simple expression of interest form, which we're putting up online, and that will close on the 10th of March. We're really looking for new, innovative, specialist skills, young people. We want young people to come and join our advisory board and help us to grow these methods that we've developed, and to grow our impact effectively on what we're doing with children and data. So I haven't seen questions come in at the moment, but I did see a comment when somebody was introducing themselves, and that was around hearing increasing interest, requests and frustration from people that we work with about the use of data, access data, and understanding the data. So I think the Promise is a really great project for almost like highlighting how under strain people at frontline services are for data and providing data and understanding how their data connects in with other things. I think in the Data for Children Collaborative, really try not to ask for new data or more data or different data, because there's so much data out there already. Our kind of philosophy at this stage is, what can we do with what's already there, and how can we make sure that we're doing that for the right reasons? So do we need to use data? Is it appropriate? Do we need all the data? We've got all of these kind of questions set up within our responsible innovation framework, so that we are always taking a reflective step back to think about the appropriateness and the use of the data. We've got a question, how exciting. So did data ethics cause problems in collecting and sharing data with the collaboration? So at this point, Dandian, we've got an ethics assessment which we see informs and strengthens our projects. So it's all about how can we improve everybody's awareness and knowledge of their responsibilities in terms of part of a diverse project team, people who haven't worked on things to do with children before, some people who haven't done anything to do with data before, so they maybe don't know the best responsible data practices. So we've got this kind of toolkit that we use to make sure that we've got a base layer of understanding and education across the team around ethics and the value of ethics. And so we haven't yet had any problems. We've not collected data as such, because as I say, we're all about using open and accessible data in the first place. In terms of sharing data, again, we're using practices both set by University of Edinburgh policy, which is our kind of ground level guidance, but adding on to that our own ethical stance on data sharing. We're using the right platforms for the right project. And you'll have seen from those 3 case studies how diverse our projects are, and that we really need to hone in on the specifics of a project to think about what our responsibilities are, even to the stage where we're making sure that everybody's clearly aware of their legal obligations. And when we've got our kind of collaborative contracts, legal contracts, we summarize those down into really clear-cut messaging to people that are working on our team so that they understand their responsibilities. So with 5 minutes to go, I'm going to double check that I have told you everything I wanted you to know. So website refresh, please go see it and go visit it and share it, because, well, Ivona, who's in the background moving everything around on this Zoom call, doing an amazing job. has also done an amazing job on the website, and I'm excited to be able to show that profile of how much good stuff we're working on. Service catalogue, so what are we here for and what can we do to help organizations, and also come to us if you want to learn about how we do something, because we can help with that as well. Advisory board applications by the 10th of March. Please, please, please share it to people. I don't know, because I would rather we had new critical friends coming and joining our advisory board. We want different, diverse people to be coming and advising us. And effectively, just really big thank you to all the contributors and all the presenters, Stefan, Lucinda and Chris at the beginning of the call, setting the scene, showing how important it is that those kind of big organizational strategies and priorities align, and that we can find what's right for the organizational piece. And also then to all the presenters from the teams who've done a brilliant job having a conversation with us. And thank you to Ivona, who's in the background, making it all happen as always. So any last questions or comments, I'd be welcome to take. There's just lots of thank you. So I really appreciate everybody's contribution today. Really lovely to have you all on the call. Just reading an introduction from Jen. Communications. Jen, it sounds like you want to get in touch with us directly, because it sounds like a really interesting conversation about communications on data. And lovely messages from everybody. But Jen, please do get in touch with us directly so we can chat about that. Brilliant. Well, I think we will close the call just now, because I think we're out questions and just lots of thank yous coming in. So if anybody wants to get in touch directly and chat to us, that is very much the message of today. Really, really happy to chat to people. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.